Hi guys. So everyone always talks about being able to play in tempo, and of course that's important. But being able to play out of tempo or in free time is also an important skill to know. Really, the only reason we need to play in tempo is if we're playing in a band, so that everyone knows what part of the song we're up to. But if you're playing solo piano, then there's really no reason for you to keep a strict tempo. And in fact, playing in free time can sound very interesting and is particularly effective when you're playing a ballad or if you're creating an introduction to a song. Now, personally, I think playing a free time intro to a song is particularly effective. Essentially, you play the whole song once through in free time as your intro, and then abruptly change to playing in tempo. Now, I think that sudden contrast of playing in free time and then snapping into really straight ahead on the beat in tempo playing sounds really nice, sounds really interesting, and really piques the listener's interest. Now, I'll play an example of this in a moment using the jazz standard Summertime, but first I'll explain generally what I'm trying to do. Then after the song, I'll detail all the specific techniques that I'm using. So first, as we all know, melodies are made up of phrases, and there are gaps between those phrases. So essentially you have phrase, little pause, and so on. And so a phrase is a logically grouped set of notes that together form a cohesive whole and sound complete. And so when you're playing in free time, we still want to keep the individual phrases largely intact, though possibly with a little bit of embellishment. This is so the melody is still recognizable. If you distort and break up an individual phrase too much, it will stop sounding like a logical, cohesive whole, and you'll start to lose the melody a little bit. They'll just sound like disparate, unrelated notes. But in the gaps between the phrases, you can really do whatever you want. You can really slow down and pull away from any semblance in tempo and really have some fun in the gaps between the phrases before returning to your next phrase, and again playing it somewhat intact. So as I'm playing, look out for the following structure. So essentially I'll be playing a phrase, then pausing, a phrase, then pausing, a phrase, then pausing, and so on. The phrases will be largely intact, though with some limited rubato and a little bit of embellishment and ornamentation of the melody, but you'll still be able to hear the individual phrase as a phrase. It'll still go bum bum bum. You'll still hear the notes close enough together and sort of connected well enough together for it to still sound like a single phrase and not a disparate set of notes. But then in the pauses between the phrases, I'm really going to extend it out and expand it and completely drop any tempo, any sense of rhythm, and really expand it out and not really care about what bar I'm in, how long I'm taking, or anything like that, before then dropping into the next phrase and again keeping it largely intact before the next pause and so on. Right, so here we go. I'm going to play all the way through the form of Summertime in free time as my introduction, and then sort of pause at the end and abruptly switch to playing in time and a really sort of straight ahead swing feel of Summertime as my proper performance after the free time introduction. Cool, so here it is. Right, so the first time I played through the entire form, it was in free time. I wasn't keeping to a particular tempo. I wasn't worried too much about how long my little fills and pauses between each phrase are. I kind of just played until my ear thought, okay, that's long enough, time to get back into the song and play the next phrase. And that was my introduction. Then at the end, I paused on a sort of a nice jazzy voicing of the A minor chord, the one chord, and then abruptly switched to playing in tempo with a walking bass line, sort of keeping the beat in the left hand, which created a really nice contrast between the intro in free time and then the proper performance in tempo. And if I was doing this properly as a performance, obviously I would continue repeating the form in tempo a few more times, maybe with a bit of improvising on top of it, maybe with a bit of comping or chordal improvisation before returning to the melody and then stopping. So hopefully conceptually, generally, you see what I'm doing. But more specifically and in a bit more detail, the techniques that I'm using over each melodic phrase is essentially embellishing the melody by adding or removing notes, maybe repeating a few notes, adding little grace notes or ornamentals, holding notes for a little bit longer or a little bit shorter than they actually should be and that they're written out in the lead sheet, introducing a little bit of rubato, so a little bit of pushing and pulling the time, but not too much, again, because we do want to keep the phrase as a single coherent whole. Playing the melody in different octaves, maybe I'd play it in this octave, to begin with, and then jump up to this octave, then come back here. Or playing it in octaves, that also sounds really nice. So I'm using all those techniques kind of sequentially throughout for each melodic phrase, but hopefully you heard each phrase was still a logical whole. You could still hear the melody, each phrase of Summertime, individually. But then between the phrases, there were long pauses where I really played around with, a whole bunch of techniques, which I'll go through in a second, but really stretched it out as long as I wanted before then dropping into the next phrase. So some of the techniques I was using in that really expansive between phrase part are arpeggios of the chords. Really simple, that's really effective because you're already playing the harmony, so why not, spread it out and expand it and extend it out with a whole bunch of arpeggios. Scale runs, I used a couple of blues scale runs, but they could be minor scale runs or chromatic scale runs or even whole tone scale runs. Really depends on what chord you've paused on between your phrases. Long fills or improvisation, that also works really nicely, but you do want to make sure that your improvisation is distinct enough to not actually sound like you're continuing on with the melody and the phrase. So for example, if your melody is quite slow, maybe you do a fast little fill with quite a fast run, or if you're playing the melody down low, maybe you want your fill to be played up high, just to create a little bit of contrast between, no, this is the melody over here, and what I'm doing now is actually just like a little fill, and now I've come back to the melody proper, so that you can actually still track the melody through the song. Because you're still playing the song, right? You're just playing it in free time. So you still want to be able to track, oh yes, I'm still in bar 5. It's just taken me 10 minutes to get to bar 5. But we are definitely in bar 5. So I'm really stretching out the time in between those phrases before dropping into the next phrase. Cool, and that's it. So practice playing in free time using all these ideas and techniques that I talked about. It's actually a underappreciated skill, because sort of from very, very early on in music learning, practice, teaching, you're taught to play in tempo and play with a metronome, and so we only ever learn to play in tempo well, and it's sometimes then a little bit difficult to transition to playing in free time, playing freely, not in tempo, but still playing it well, not making it sound crap, like you've lost your place, or that you haven't quite logically connected from one part to the other, or you've left it too long or not long enough. It sort of takes a bit of practice to be able to play in free time in a way that's still interesting and lyrical and still connects the song smoothly all the way through the form. And it is subjective, everyone does it slightly differently, so you do it your own way. But otherwise, that's it. Hopefully you found that a little bit interesting, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.